Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have Kelly Smith with us. Kelly oversees all aspects of digital transformation to include team building, customer experience development, design, and product management. Kelly brings a unique perspective to executive committees and boardrooms due to his broad and deep experience from both the traditional CIO perspective as well as Chief Digital Officer, Chief Experience Officer experience. From this vantage point, he has managed back-of-house IT teams, marketing technology teams, and cutting-edge consumer applications. Kelly is currently the Chief Strategy Officer of Hagerty, the world's largest insurer of collectible cars and the largest automotive enthusiast membership organization. In this role, he serves as the CIO, CDO, and CSO. Previously, Kelly was the Senior Vice President and Chief Digital Officer at MGM Resorts. It's a global hospitality company of over 80,000 employees. Before MGM, Kelly was with Starbucks, where he served as Vice President Global Digital Products, leading the teams responsible for the company's popular mobile and web products, which are world leaders in retail innovation, driving millions of daily transactions and billions in revenue. Kelly has started and sold several venture-backed software companies and is known to design and develop his initial prototypes. He started his career in the earliest days of the internet, marketing the first commercial version of the Mosaic web browser. The company was sold to CompuServe and America Online, and then Kelly went on to work for Real Networks, where they pioneered the technology for audio and video streaming on the internet. Kelly, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, my friend. We were just talking at the before the opening how long it's been since we connected. It's quite a few years, I think. So glad to be here.
Yes. And what I didn't include in my intro about you is the fact that you were on my board for some years. That's probably 15, 20 years ago now, something like that. Really long time. I guess 15 maybe.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, you look exactly the same. So
thank you.
Podcast on lifestyle choices, I suspect.
I do have an entire podcast show all about lifestyle choices and lifestyle design and biohacking and all that. Yes, and part of it is getting I wouldn't say lucky. I'd say more fortunate with good genes, but also making smart choices about things relating to what you put in your body, supplementation, and even stem cell therapy and meditation, neurofeedback. All this helps keep you young, inside and outside. Yeah.
Well,
anyways,
all right.
So
good.
Let's talk about marketing. Now, I would love to hear your definition of digital transformation, because that is such a key aspect of your role at Hagerty and a key aspect of your career path, your trajectory. And I'd love to understand more about what that means for you and what you think the misconceptions and misunderstandings are about digital transformation, the concept and the definition from others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I will start by kind of telling you that I kind of fell into this area of focus a little bit by accident. And in fact, I'm not even really sure I'd heard the term when I was in the middle of it. And that really started with my time at Starbucks. I was asked to help build the digital team for Starbucks in China. And they were just exploding at that time. Even now, we were opening, one new store every 15 hours. And so,
wow.
Yeah. And so in the process of basically trying to, bring new customer facing innovations to market, and in China, those were things like digital payment, replacing plastic loyalty cards with an ability to earn loyalty points, from your phone and so on. That was really when it started to become clear to me where companies can sometimes struggle, because, you're kind of having to innovate your way into the unknown in many, many respects. And I think what I'll sort of say is that all too often traditional IT teams maybe just don't have that mindset necessarily. So that's kind of where it really started. And it's really, so much of it is about people and culture. but yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about it. But that's kind of how this whole thing started.
So let's kind of differentiate what it's like in China in terms of the digital usage and, let's say, the United States, because everyone is on the same platform in China, and it's WeChat, and it's used for payments, it's used for messaging, and pretty much most aspects of life can be conducted through WeChat. And you don't have that kind of pervasive singular system here in the States. So I'm curious to hear how you would apply what you learned in China in the US, where in some ways we're quite backwards. And I know that might ruffle some feathers when they hear that like, no, China's not leading. Well, in certain areas, they are absolutely leading. Like, for example, certain aspects of AI, they are the world leader. Like, there's just no comparison. Like facial recognition, for
Absolutely right.
example, facial
True.
recognition AI,
Mm-hmm.
there's no one even close to
Very
them.
true. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And just to give an example, at that time, we were really proud of our ability to offer mobile order and pay or order in advance in the US. But in China, what was interesting about that was, you know, they made it pretty clear to us that that wasn't going to be good enough. People just want it brought to their desk. And I remember thinking, oh, well, that actually seems even better. Because that's what people do, right? You have lunch brought to you. So there isn't really much of a market in China for ordering to the retail store ahead of you know getting there, and so that's definitely, I think, a good example. But yeah, what I took away, I think, was just kind of being flexible with specific concepts, but being pretty focused though on the overall strategy. The tactics can certainly change, and the tactics there, of course, were that yeah, we built a native mobile app, and that was useful, but it was also very important for us to get really proficient building apps on WeChat, and there was a tremendous appetite for it. And you certainly appreciate the differences in other development platforms like that. You appreciate the differences in UX and UI, and customer expectations from scenario to scenario or can be very different even for the same company and the same basic offerings. So the key thing I think I would sort of say is that it's really helpful in these digital transformation roles to just have a really solid grasp of product concepts and UX and UI concepts and engineering concepts broadly, and don't really be in love with specific technologies, because that's not the goal if you have to serve global markets. So yeah, I learned a lot though. I'll tell you, it moves fast over there.
Yeah, I bet. Where does digital transformation fit in terms of user experience, customer experience, user interface design, loyalty, marketing, sales? Like, where does digital transformation live in an organization? Who's in charge of it? Because a lot of companies don't have a chief digital officer, a
Mm-hmm.
chief strategy
Right.
officer, or a specific role to oversee this digital transformation initiative that they may be embarking upon, so, or needing. So where does it live? How do these different departments, sometimes silos that don't speak to each other very well, interact to make this an effective initiative?
I think the first thing I would say is that I'm not convinced that every company needs this kind of role. I think it depends on a case by case scenario. And largely, I think that has to do with the CEO. What are their capabilities and understandings and so forth. But the other thing I would say is that there is not a one size fits all digital transformation strategy. It varies from company to company. But I do think that there are more or less common traits. But just backing up for a second, you know, why the role? and why is it important for those boards and leadership teams who choose to take this kind of talent on board. And fundamentally, you can think of it like this: if everybody is reading the same information about success stories and even failure stories, we have on the one hand, Blockbuster and who was it? RIM, BlackBerry, the makers of BlackBerry. You could say even Motorola, actually, and then more traditional stories like Sears and Macy's and Kmart and sort of others. But then over here, on the other hand, you've got stories like Starbucks and Domino's and Target and Walmart. So you definitely see digital transformation taking place, and you can observe that either people are transforming themselves right out of business, or they are transforming themselves in new ways as a company so that they can be more competitive against whoever they're competing with. Most oftentimes it seems like it's Amazon. But it's a curious thing, though, isn't it? There's freely available information to all of these boards. So what's going on? Right? What's going on that could result in two dramatically different outcomes? And lying in that answer is why this kind of role exists. A lot of it is definitely about innovation and process and new product experiences, but sitting a layer above that, it's really about culture and people and mindset, I would say. So that's the why at a really high level.
Yeah, and what makes your mindset? What makes you an ideal candidate for a digital transformation role because of your mindset that others don't have? I have an idea because we know each other from way back when, but why don't you answer that from your perspective?
Well, I mean, the people that I really follow and look up to in these kinds of roles, they tend to be, I guess, polymaths in a way, which is to say that they're good business people, they're good marketers, they're good technical minds, and they're good product people. And the reason that's important is because you need to help the organization figure out what is its own particular unique landscape and what really needs addressing. And then from there, you can help the organization start to frame, clear transformation goals. Not having clear transformation goals is a big part of the problem. And so you do need to be fairly strategic, I think, to do this role. It's not just about making neat mobile apps or chatbots or whatever it is that people sometimes say. It's really not that at all. It's really about helping the leadership team understand the ways in which digital disruption can be helpful and hurtful to their particular situation, and then helping the organization understand how to course correct and make strategy adjustments and investments, and then everything falls from that. And certainly some of those really interesting products come out the other side of that if you're doing it right. There's no doubt about that. But that happens way down the line. I'm curious what you would have said.
Well, I think of you as Renaissance man. So polymath is kind of another way of saying that. I consider you very agile and nimble, and it's kind of a chameleon in a way where you can adapt to scenarios that are quite different. And like being in China, where it's like a different planet, right? So off the top of my head, that's what I would say.
You asked me before we came online here today. We were talking a little bit about why some of these roles tend to be so short-lived, and I think the answer to that's probably decently long, but a short version is that in many ways, this kind of role is a little bit like a consulting role. You certainly can have longer tenures wherein you're still doing the consulting role, but then you kind of start moving into that execution phase, where you start building up new teams and developing new muscle and new capabilities and new product work streams and so on and so forth. But I suppose the most significant value, though, probably comes in that in the consultation phase kind of up front, which is, all right, what is digital transformation going to mean for us? And then once people get it, to be honest with you, one version of success is that the CIO and the CMO and the CEO and others start kind of galvanizing around that strategy and around that vision and up-leveling themselves. And then they start to up-level their team and they kind of just start marching down the tracks. That's great. And if the chief digital officer has a short tenure and in that case, and it's working, that's a perfectly fine outcome from my perspective.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's really weird to me is that even the chief marketing officer has a short tenure typically. It's surprising when you see a 5 or 7 year long stint for a CMO, whereas 9 or 12 months doesn't seem that unusual. It's just kind of bizarre to me.
That's a really good point. I suspect that one of the reasons that's happening is that there's a little bit of a shakeup around that role right now. And again, I think it has everything to do with the implications of digital. But, you know, not every marketer necessarily has the digital chops to really kind of weigh in and help in all of those other areas. Like, how are we going to drive more engagement around our media properties, or how are we going to drive more downloads of our app, or how are we going to, drive more views of our content? And that's where it all starts to fall apart for some CMOs, is that they just are still in some of those traditional sides of the craft and the brand side of the craft, which is still very important. But, it's an interesting thought, right? Will there be any non-technical CMOs in the Fortune 100 in 10 years?
I doubt that. I just don't see them staying in the Fortune 100 if that's the case.
I would imagine, it's an interesting thought exercise, but I think that's kind of what's going on there.
Yeah. If a CMO has not read Snow Crash or The Diamond Age, they're not, I don't know, forward thinking enough, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Or Ready Player One, right? So just thinking in terms of where the puck will be and not just where the puck is currently, to use the Wayne Gretzky quote. It just seems like there's not a place for the Luddite in the future of a Fortune 100 company, I would guess.
I think that's exactly right. And certainly, you could probably take it further if you wanted to, and you could sort of say, okay, well, in a new era, is it reasonable to say that the expectation of your C-level executive teams should be that they are active drivers of the innovation agenda and active creators of the innovation agenda? And I would say, yes. Yes for the COO, yes for the CMO, yes for the CIO, right? The cynical types might say, yeah, those chief digital officer roles, those are just like kindling to start the fire. That's fine. If that works for you, that's great, right? Because the reason I say that is because other companies that literally go out of business, they're struggling with culture change, right?
Yeah. I love this quote. I heard it from Peter Diamandis at Abundance 360, which is his event, a couple years ago. And he said there are two kinds of businesses that will exist at the end of this current decade. Businesses that are using AI at their core, and businesses that are out of business.
I think I like the point of that. I think that a good place for businesses to start is to just be really, really, really good stewards of data and use data creatively, right? Now, if some of that is being done in more traditional ways that's not passing through machine learning algorithms, that's fine, but it's a good place to start. It's just that most people really are not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely start there. And for this reason, by the way, when you're trying to create a digital transformation product strategy, you're not out there saying, hey, we need an enterprise data hub because it sounds cool. You're not out there saying we should give Snowflake a big pile of money because that's what everybody else is doing. You're doing it because odds are good that you don't have the foundation to leverage data to the max in the building. Good example. One of my former employers, MGM Resorts, better known for owning a lot of those big casinos and properties in Vegas, they don't really have a good handle on who some of their big frequent spenders are, believe it or not. Right. And I don't mean the whales who come in and gamble a lot, because they do have a better view of that. But I mean, the people like you who are going to go, and there's a clear pattern of you sort of staying in the nicer rooms, a clear pattern of you, being one of those lucky guys who rented the cabana by the pool, right? People who opted for the spa, and then people who dinner that night went to one of the top 3 or 4 restaurants out there. They have a very hard time putting all that together. Call that a technology problem if you want, but that's the issue, right? I mean, we're not even to AI yet.
Yep. That wouldn't be a problem in China, I would imagine. Like the facial recognition and all that would take care of that right away.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for all of us, the technology capability is really there. It's just, do you have the people at the helm to create the strategies, and then to create the constructs that you need to maximize AI capability? I think you wouldn't be surprised to know, not every CIO has that capability. A lot of CIOs out there, and I mean a lot of them, have never logged into an AWS account or don't have one.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Good point. And that brings me to another point, that it's not about the data, it's about gleaning actionable insights from the data. You can have a huge data warehouse and all it does is collect data. I mean, I'm guilty of that in my personal life. I pull in all my data of all my transactions into Quicken, and I do absolutely nothing with it. My company's handled through my bookkeeper and accountant and all that, and they use QuickBooks, and all that's handled. But for my personal finances, all I do is spend the 2 minutes every month or two to import the data from all the banks and the credit card companies and all that into Quicken. I do absolutely nothing with it. Haven't budgeted. I don't know. I can't remember last time I tried to come up with a personal budget. It's been decades. I just, it's not how I'm wired. So that's a personal example of collecting data for absolutely no use. I'm sure our listener can relate to that. So how do you glean actionable insights out of this stuff?
That is such a really great, easy to understand example, because so many companies have these investments in whatever it may be, in technology, what have you. And when boards aren't happy with the outcome, fortunately, I think the reasons are actually fairly simple. Most of the time, I would say it's probably because the leadership team didn't specify the outcomes in the first place. So we all, I think, underestimate how easy it is to go about our day and get confused around, things happening versus we're achieving our outcomes. It feels eerily similar because you feel busy. Things are happening. People are doing stuff. You're going to meetings. Stuff's getting built. You're shipping things and so forth. But a lot of times what these conversations are about and what these roles are about is just simply putting more critical thought into sort of saying, what are the goals? Is everybody aligned, by the way? right? Are we all aligned when we say digital transformation and we each got in separate rooms and let's say we were questioned? Would we all say the same thing? Most of the time, the answer is no. When we talk about why are we going to make a native mobile app, most of the time people will give answers like, well, because mobile's important and more people use mobile than use desktops. But the product mindset sort of says, okay, here's my contribution. That answer is not good enough.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's the lazy answer, because the percentage of apps on mobile phones that are actually used is like, it's tiny. Like, it's just crazy.
Right.
Most of the apps on my phone never see the light of day. They're not even installed anymore. They're just in the cloud, and then I have to wait 30 seconds until they're re-downloaded again in order to use it, because that's how infrequently I use those apps. I probably use maybe 4 or 5 apps. That's it. And I'm not atypical. So if you think that you're creating a mobile app for the purpose of serving your audience because they're on mobile phones, well, that's like saying, well, I'm going to send this junk mail because they have mailboxes, and I know that they like getting mail in their mailboxes. There are important things that arrive in their mailboxes. That's why I'm sending them the junk mail. Makes no sense.
That's it. That's right. And it is a really, really good example. And so the contribution to the equation is really to just take it to that next level and then try to instill that habit in coworkers. And so by that, I mean, solve for need, write it down, and have a hypothesis for why you think that's a need. Even then, the next part of this is assume you're not right a lot of the time. In fact, assume you're not right all of the time. If you're going to solve for need, how do you know it's a need, and how do you know the thing you're making is going to solve for it? So the next muscle to build is to sort of say, all right, now that we're all aligned with that, we have another task, which is minimize time to value. Very simple. And people say, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, you've heard about things called MVPs and everything else. You know why the world invented those acronyms? Because they're trying to tell you minimize time to value. Figure out that the problem you're solving is really the problem, and figure out that the thing you're building is really the thing that's going to fix the problem. So in the case of mobile, you would start with an outcome that was pretty clearly stated that said, hey, I think we'll sell more Cabana reservations if we redesigned the Cabana page, readdressed the UX, and made it responsive. All right, well, that sounds like a perfectly great theory. Sounds like a good one. So let's figure out how we test that, and let's figure out what the cost is going to be to test that, and let's start to make some milestones. Now, all those sound really, really simple, and to be honest with you, in retrospect, it actually is. It's just a way of thinking. And I find a lot of times, I was in a meeting the other day where, our colleagues on the business side were saying to us on the product side, they were saying, we've been asking to have this fixed for a year and it's still not fixed. And I just don't understand, why are we not making more progress? And I said, what is the thing to be fixed? And people had forgotten.
Yeah.
The specifics of is it one thing? Is it 3 things? Do we know it's a problem because we validate it's a problem? And that's not a criticism at all. It's just, that's the product mindset contribution to bring to companies of the modern age, right? Is invoke critical thinking and go 2, 3, 4, 5 levels down, right? And really unpack things like crazy. And if you want to talk about infusing every conversation in the building with increased levels of curiosity, that's good too. In fact, you can't take it out of this whole conversation. I'll bet a lot of successful people because of what you do. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you say that one of the characteristics of those people is that they're just excessively curious compared to regular people?
Mm-hmm. I would. And I would also say that the most successful people know how to make that curiosity infectious. They know how to invoke that curiosity gap between what you're producing, what you're delivering, and what is going on in the consumer or the customer's mind, so that you're not giving away the punchline too quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I don't know if you meant to say this, but tell me if another way to say the same thing is that they tend to be able to bring people along because, for lack of a better phrase, they're good storytellers.
Yeah. Yeah. And the best kind of marketers are the best kind of storytellers, and ones who can use data to assist them in that process. So it's data-driven storytelling. Instead of just reporting on the numbers, how about you tell stories that mean something to the person hearing or receiving that story?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. And I think to build on that, when we talk about bringing a concept of OKRs, objectives and key results, into a digital transformation conversation, it's just another way of saying what you just said, which is, think about the problem we're trying to solve, and then figure out if the data kind of supports the hypothesis, and then figure out, like, if we did a good job, how would we know? Right? Like, literally, how the heck am I supposed to measure it? And it's not rocket science in a way, and that's the good thing.
Yeah, but it's not. But it also requires a special skill set of, I would say, pattern recognition and even pattern utilization. So it's not enough to just recognize the patterns. For example, you might see that in analyzing the data, that Italian wine and pasta correlate in terms of purchase behavior, right? So purchase behavior of the consumer, they'll buy some Italian wine and they'll buy some pasta in the same shopping session. But then the non-intuitive example might be white wine and bread. And they didn't recognize that to be, or they didn't feel that was necessarily a trend, but then the data supports that or shows that. So then they spot the pattern, then they have to utilize it, and that could be applied through just a kind of carte blanche approach of everybody who is in the white wine section sees an offer for bread, or it could be on a personalization type of approach, where if the person individually has a purchase behavior, or at least just a browsing behavior in the white wine department, they're also being offered some bread. So I'm curious, actually, on that point, where do you sit on the side of, like, is it personalization is the right approach for the future, so everybody gets a unique experience? Or is it just applying general terms, like you gave the Cabanas example a little bit ago, and that would be something that you could just apply to the page, to the web page across the board, and not personalize it?
I always like to say that when working on these big digital transformation projects, I like to say that we've got to earn the right to play with the fun stuff. And by that, I mean the AI example we talked about earlier, I suppose, is a kind of example, which is to say, yeah, AI is cool. And I agree with what you said about it being the future, but I also want to see that we understand how to think about leveraging data in more basic ways.
Oh, you got to walk before you can run.
So that we can work our way there. You got to walk before you can run. That's exactly right. I'll tell you a funny story. People who know me well know that I obsess over my presentations, my PowerPoint presentations. Oh yeah. So speaking of walk before you run, people who know me well know that I tend to obsess over presentations. So when I do have to give a presentation, if it's in the form of a slide deck, I usually put a decent amount of time into that deck to make it compelling. And most of the time, I think it's a little bit shocking to people. But the reason is because I like to say, if you can't make a good PowerPoint, you're not going to make a great mobile app. And I think that's true. I've got a question for you, because I know your background, and I totally understand how you've built a career on evaluating data and making sense of data and then making a decision. And I do think that knowing when to pivot and when to hold fast is a classic challenge for all of us doing some of the work that we do. And for me, it raises the question around the value of intuition and what role intuition should play in your toolkit. Is it your view that intuition is kind of overhyped and actually it's really just about data and experience of pattern recognition? Or do you think it's still a thing? Like, does it play into your toolkit?
Wow, what a cool question. Now, if I would have gotten this question, let's say a couple of years ago, I would have given, I don't know, just some politically correct, straight answer that you would expect to hear. But I had a big spiritual awakening a year ago. So my answer is completely different now than it would have been prior to that. So intuition is teaching from within. It is your higher self, your spiritual support team, angels, etc., whispering into your consciousness. It's not actually your own thoughts. They're using your thoughts as a way to convey the information to you. So you can receive information that you couldn't possibly know. Which stocks or cryptocurrencies are going to go sky high, for example. You could receive that as an intuition, and you choose to act on that. You have to use discernment, and there's a lot of caveats here. This probably sounds, for somebody who's more skeptical, like nonsense. But we all have these intuitive insights that we receive that end up changing our lives. For example, I got one when I was still agnostic, didn't really believe in anything, that I should pick up and move to New Zealand, which sounded to all my friends and family like ridiculous, I don't know, some sort of a lark, really. Like, what are you thinking? Like, everybody's going to Silicon Valley to build their business. You're in Madison, Wisconsin. You need to move to the Bay Area, not to New Zealand. Have you ever even been there before? I hadn't. I just had this intuition that I should pick up and move. And so I applied for permanent residency. I got in. Bear in mind, I still had not ever stepped foot in the country. But I knew without a shadow of a doubt that we were going to go. I had to convince my wife at the time that this was a sound decision to make, but it was magical. 7.5 years there of just magic. And that was meant for me. That was meant for my life. And it was through intuition that I got there. It wasn't because of data. I had no data. I knew nothing about New Zealand. I had no understanding of how different New Zealand and Australia were from each other. No clue. So again, I'm
now you're a believer.
Probably sounding pretty woo-woo here, but I think this needs, from my standpoint, an authentic answer rather than the politically correct or no nonsense answer.
And I love the answer because, again, I've known you for quite a while, and way back in the day, you were doing work with SEO and everything else, and of course, so much of that is just about data, right? Just evaluating the data, you're making decisions, and so on and so forth. And in those days, given what you were doing, you weren't making a lot of those work decisions on intuition, I suspect.
I was still getting guidance, but I was not paying as much attention to it. See, when you go against your intuition, then you end up in all kinds of trouble, right? So you get this intuition that you should not go to work today. You shouldn't drive to the office or whatever. And you do it anyways. And then you get in a car crash.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I should have listened. I should have listened to my gut. But how did your gut know? It wasn't your gut. It wasn't some neurons in your gut. Your gut actually does have neurons, and so does your heart. But that's not how you knew. It was because on the other side of the veil, they knew. And they were trying to steer you in the right direction, and you didn't listen. And I've gone against my intuition many times. Not anymore. I know better. But just trust your intuition and follow it. Follow through. So if I think of somebody out of the blue that it's been years since I've been in contact with that person, maybe it was a past client, and I don't know, they changed roles multiple times, I didn't keep in touch, and I get this intuition that I should reach out and say hello. And then lo and behold, they need SEO services, and then they become a client shortly thereafter. That wasn't random.
Mm-hmm.
That's intuition.
Well, there you go, folks. I think it's a powerful thing, because even in the context of the topic we were talking about earlier, you're making big bets and you're making big recommendations to investors or to board members or to CEOs. We should go invest in this, right? And before things happen, before the fruit of the investment pays off, you're kind of relying on something, and hopefully you have some data. But to your point, and I agree, it's got to be more than just data, right? Because, and I think it's an important conversation we don't talk a lot about in this business, the power of intuition in product management and digital leadership. Again, it's something to listen for, right, before you go in and recommend those really, really big bets.
Yeah, it's not blind faith. Somebody who's skeptical might say, dismiss it as, well, you just don't have data, so you're making something up that's based on what you want to have happen. Well, if you're truly connected to your intuition, then it's faith that isn't blind. It's faith that is plugged in to the magic, to the fabric of creation, to the other side of the veil, that those veils are thinning. This is an interesting bit of trivia I learned last year. The term apocalypse doesn't mean end of the world. It's from the Greek apocalypsis, which means thinning of the veils. And the veils are thinning. More and more people are having, without a doubt, signs that there's something more than just this physical reality to their existence. It's really, really cool. And you're seeing TV shows that have that premise more and more, documentaries included, like the Surviving Death show on Netflix, or Manifest, which is a fictional show, but clearly they've had some over at Netflix. They had some experts weighing in on how this actually works, so that it is legit sounding and not just completely fanciful. Interesting times to live in.
This conversation feels like a close cousin of another favorite topic of mine, which is quantum mechanics. But that's for another day, I think, because we wouldn't solve it is another hour.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of quantum. I actually studied it in graduate school. I was studying for a degree, PhD in biochemistry, and I took some quantum mechanics courses. But yeah, definitely closely related. I don't know if you follow Dr. Joe Dispenza. I love his work and his writings and his teachings, his workshops and stuff.
I'll give him a read for sure.
Yeah. And also Dr. Amit Goswami. He was on the documentary What the Bleep Do We Know? He's a quantum physicist, and it's written about the God particle and stuff. He's really, really cool. He's been on my other podcast on Get Yourself Optimized.
Wow.
Fascinating episode.
Interesting guest. Well, hey, I sure am glad, speaking of reaching out, you did just that to me, and I'm sure glad to reconnect with you again. And
yeah, likewise.
Fun conversation.
So if our listener wants to follow you, learn from you, where do they go?
Sure. My website is just my name, kellysmith.com, and I'm at Curious Office on Twitter. Speaking of curiosity being important, those are two good places, and then you can go from there. So
awesome. Well, thank you, Kelly, and thank you, listener. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Stephan.